It's a pleasure and an honor to welcome Steve Burrill. He's the CEO of Burrill and Company. But that's a very short title. He is a legend in the biotech industry, a man who's literally transformed the very face of biotech. Steve, it's a true pleasure to welcome you.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Steve, it's very interesting that you are here amongst us at the world's largest conference for entrepreneurs. And you come from a background which is accounting. You spent years with Ernst & Young, but you ran a very large life sciences practice. And then you were also a part of the team that wrote the business plan for Genentech. Just wanted you to share some experiences from the transition from Ernst & Young to Genentech.
Well, I think the challenge for any of us is to do something different. And you could do something different from any base. I did have an accounting and tax and consulting base. I did that for a long time. And in so doing, I helped hundreds, maybe thousands of entrepreneurs build successful companies. At some point, you decide it's time to take your own medicine. So it was time to go off and repot myself and start something different. When I left Ernst & Young at the end of '93, 28 years later, I'd built a $2.5 billion business. I had 25,000 people working for me. And I walked out of there and said, I'm going to go do something different. I had no clue.
But bioscience is so very different, although you ran the practice of life sciences there. But what gave you the confidence, you think, to jump into a totally different, a new ball game of helping and form these huge companies?
Well, I had two goals when I started Burrill and Company. One was I was tired of giving everybody advice. I wanted to own things as opposed to help other people own things. And secondly, I was at that point in my life where being a good humanitarian was an important thing. I didn't want to just make money on the internet. I wanted to do something where I worked all day to cure diseases and feed the world and solve the problems of the world. And so I had a humanitarian need, so I decided we were only going to work in life sciences, and the goal was to own things and to build life science companies.
And your companies, if I look at it as three big components, I think. One is the investment, the equity part. The other is the publication part, and third is the events part. How do you combine all these three?
Well, we have $1 billion in our venture capital business or private equity business. We own some 90+ companies around the world. We have a very active merchant banking business. If you think about people like Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, the big firms, they have 5, 10, 15 people in the life sciences business. We have 80. So we're much bigger than them. So we do enormous transactions for big companies and for small companies, partnering in M&A and financings. And along the way, because I knew a lot about this industry and I talked a lot about the industry, we wrote about it, and the publications and media business that grew up out of that was a need to try and make sure that others around me knew what was going on in the industry, had a sense of all that. We used conferences as a vehicle to bring the brightest people in the world together and to have interesting dialogue to make sure we were on the cutting edge of things. We tend to sunset things so that as soon as everybody else is doing it, we'll move on. So we did the early venture capital meetings. Today there's one a day every place in the world. We don't do that anymore. That need is being filled by others. We did partnering meetings. Today there are partnering meetings all over. We don't need to do that. We do meetings today on things like consumer digital health, personalized medicine. We do meetings around aging or stem cells. We do meetings around interesting geographies like Latin America or China or India. And so we try and bring people together on the cutting edge issues of the day and not just be in a media business for the sake of being in the media business.
What are the challenges for the biotech or biosciences vertical and the companies in that is, in terms of investment, it takes a lot more money, a lot more years for fruition. What is your take on it? Because people keep, giving money into it.
Well, somebody will come in and ask us for $5 or $10 or $15 million. That isn't the tough part. The tough part is where's the next billion that may be necessary to get someplace. And so it's easy to get things started. The real question is, can you build things of consequence and make a difference? But if you stand back for a minute and you say, what are the 4 or 5 biggest problems in the world? The biggest problems of the world are climate change, clean water, energy self-sufficiency, food production, healthcare. All of those big problems in the world are answered by biotechnology. So we happen to be alive at that moment in time when the core issues of the world are answered by these sciences. And the question is, how can we take those sciences, how can we add capital, how can we add our expertise and our network to build things that really make a difference? Now, you can be pretty passionate about that and get really fired up about doing that, so you can bring together then people and ideas and capital, an array of things to try and solve those problems.
I want to bring you back to the entrepreneurship question, because there are a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs, both either they are from the scientific community or they are from college grads who want to immediately jump to the entrepreneurship bandwagon. where do you see the imminent challenges for these entrepreneurs compared to, let's say, high tech?
So there are several. One is that the customer, in this case, patient, or the user, is generally not the payer. And so we have to think about markets differently. We have to think about what are those markets going to look like, how are those markets going to be served. If you and I start a company today, the issue is how is healthcare going to be paid for and delivered in 2020? Not what do we do today, what does the healthcare system look like in the US or China or India or Brazil or Russia, but what is the system going to look like? How is the confluence of technology going to change what a patient does? We have basically a sickness care system in the world today. We wait for people to get sick, then we try to do something. And by 2020, we're going to be in a wellness care system. That is to say, we're going to be preempting disease, and we're going to be treating a well population, a very different world. And so the entrepreneur today needs to think about the time it's going to take to develop something for a product, for a market that's going to change rapidly. So we have to think way ahead. Now, my vision of the world, your vision of the world may be different, but you better have a vision of what it's going to look like 5 or 10 years. You and I start a software company, we can be in business tomorrow. Our customer will decide. In our case, we may not see the customer for a decade. So capital is going to take prodigious amounts of capital. Everything in our industry has to go through some form of regulation or a regulatory pathway before they see access to a customer. And by and large, the customer isn't the guy that pays for it. So if you have to understand then, okay, if all of those things are true, then how am I going to build a company in that world? Most entrepreneurs say, I got the science. I figured out how to do this, as if that's the answer. Kind of stipulate the science works. That isn't the question. The question is, how do you take that science and build a meaningful company that really solves a problem, get paid for, and then return the capital to people that provided it and provide them a reasonable return? That's a tough business.
Finally, in terms of the markets and the opportunities, there's a huge, I think, market in the emerging geographies, because the cost-price ratio is pretty significant there. Do you focus in those parts? Well,
historically, if you look back, the U.S., Japan, Europe was kind of a third. People kind of figured the rest of it wasn't that relevant. If you go out 10, 15 years, the big booming economies are BRIC countries, Africa, the Middle East, Turkey, some of the smaller countries today like Vietnam, Indonesia, major players, what some people would call the frontier countries. Those are the countries that are going to drive the economy. They have the same needs. These problems aren't local problems, they're global problems. So we have tremendous opportunity to meet those needs in a different environment.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.